Go to Hebrews 11, verse 32. Is there any need to say more? There is not time for me to give an account of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David or Samson and the prophet. These were men who through faith conquered kingdoms, did what is right and earned the promises. They could keep a lion's mouth shut, put out blazing fires, emerged unscathed from battle. They were weak people who were given strength to be brave in war and drive back foreign invaders, and so on. I want to speak because this morning there was a reference to Jesus walking on water, on Peter, on faith. And again, the more I go on in this walk, the more I believe it's important, and this is what happened on the weekend as well, to emphasize again the positive things that we see in people rather than the negative. Now, it is important, as Ben Gray says, and this is important to get right theology, because the basis of everything has to be right foundation. If we have a wrong foundation, we end up being unbalanced. We do have to acknowledge sin. As Ben Gray said it, woe is me before God. God, I am a sinner. I need your help to change. We have to start there. But often what we do is our carnal nature looks at that, and the devil gets in, and we're hard on ourselves and we're extremely hard on others. And we only see the negatives in others rather than the wow, which is the God factor in people. And so as long as we have the right foundation, because it's important that we don't have a wrong foundation where the woe is me is not mentioned at all. But as long as we have the right foundation, it's critically important to emphasize God and what God does in us and the good things that God is and has in people, rather than how they're not matching up. And so I want to talk a little bit about Gideon. Now, Gideon, here he's mentioned as a hero of faith. It says there in Hebrews 11 that all those people, they were weak people. So weakness does not disqualify anyone from this journey. In fact, weakness is almost a prerequisite for the journey. Because if we don't acknowledge that we're weak, we think that we're doing it. And that's a very dangerous, more of a dangerous place to be than anything. So often the excuse is, I'm weak. I'm not good enough. I'm not gifted enough. I don't have the credentials. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough power. I don't have enough influence over people. So forget me. That was Gideon's story. But as we know, Gideon was a mighty warrior. He was a great man. He was a man that was significant for the people of Israel. And if we go to Judges chapter 6, we won't go through all of it, but we remember in verse 11 that Gideon was called. He was the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which is the town that he lived in, which belonged to Joash of Abiezer. Gideon, his son, was threshing wheat inside the winepress to keep him hidden from the Midianites. The Midianites were the conquering people who came in and they took everything. They raped, they burnt, they took people away. They were a thorn in Israel's side. And don't forget, at this time, Israel was an emerging nation. They had not established everything yet. There were still tribes all around the place. They were not always united as they could have been. A lot of them fought individual battles as tribes. God was, trying to bring them together. And it was a time of the judges, so that there were people that God appointed over these tribes. They say this was the lowest point in Israel because there was no clear leadership at times. Richard was telling me the story this week that this is about leadership. And they did a study, correct me if I got this wrong. Oh, Richie's upstairs, so I can't refer to him. But they did a study of all the major, I think all teams, cricket, football, all types of football, probably baseball, everything. And they looked at what was the key factor for the most successful teams. And they looked at money, they looked at, administration, they looked at, where they were situated, they looked at everything. What they found is the most important factor of all was leadership. So I know that sports varies. Sometimes it's the captain that's the most important, and sometimes it's the manager or the coach. They use the word captain, but it varies from sport to sport. But the most successful teams were the ones that had the best leaders, and usually when you have the best leaders, you have the best culture, and you have the best relationships. So that's very important. It's very important in anything that we do that we understand that principle. Because that is the thing that is most important. It's not the only thing, but it's the most important thing. And if you see Richie, he can tell you where you can, get that study. I think it's an important study. In fact, money is usually a pretty big factor in the success of these teams and sports, and it's not to be left out. But that's even more important than money. So that shows you how important it is. So this was a low time in Israel. Leadership was scarce. So God looks and finds Gideon because the Midianites were going berserk. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him, he said, Yahweh, is it with you? When the angel of Yahweh appeared to him, he said to Gideon, he called him a valiant warrior. A valiant warrior. Now that, again, I'm just using this principle. There's two themes to this. It's faith. Okay, a lot of us do not make progress in the spiritual life or even in the natural life because of a lack of faith. Because we will not take risks. This is not presumption or irresponsibility, but it's a measured, if you like, risk. Prayed about, discussed in God. Many of us are still at the same place because we do not make this step. Because we also look at how weak we are, how incompetent I am. I didn't have a chance to share a lot on the weekend because I did a sort of a biblical basis for things. But if I had the opportunity, I would have shared that it's possible to have a good marriage. Because if I had to look at me and my weakness in my 20s, it would have been impossible to be where I'm at today. There would have been 1,000 to 1 chance. If you were, the Melbourne Cup's coming up, if you're one of those people, not recommending it, but I'm just saying, if you're one of those, they have odds. Odds means that the bigger the odd, the less likely it is if you never indulge in such sports. I know most of you haven't because you're very holy here, so it's all right. I'm not. But if you had one time in your life, it's a miracle. It was an impossibility, if you like. And that's how we've got to see life. We've got to see that there is that little bit of potential in me, that little bit of God factor, if it's not a lot, in me, that within the area of my realm and gifting, and it's not sort of to conquer the world, but in that area I can do all things through Christ. I can make a difference. I can even change a nation if necessary. Certainly even at least run a family. So Gideon doesn't see himself as a mighty warrior. As far as he's concerned, he's a weak man, and he is. In fact, his faith is, and it's encouraging, to read these people, because this guy's faith was pretty fickle too. He wanted sign after sign. I've done that from time to time. It's, again, don't think, he's asking me to be a big faith man, I'm going out there. No, again, we have to acknowledge that we're weak. It's about weak people. God does stuff. It's a God factor thing. But we've got to look to God. Gideon saw himself as pretty hopeless. He was weak in faith. In Hebrews, though, it tells us he was strong in faith. Looking back, because he responded in his weakness, he responded to God. See, God's not concerned about, in a sense, how many times you've fallen or how weak you are. He's concerned about how you look to him and how you see yourself as his son and daughter, your identity in him and what you can do through him. That's what he's concerned about. So I'm not just saying this for the collection next week, but that's only a very small part of it. But I'm speaking about what you can do for God. And even on the weekend, we've probably identified, half a dozen couples that we could do, that could help us do a more outreach marriage sort of weekend. And we can do it. You don't have to get up and speak, but we can do it. Again, we downgrade ourselves too much. It's okay to be realistic, okay? Gideon was. Faith isn't being untrue, by the way. Some people preach it this way. I'm sick. No, I'm not really sick. I believe God. But I'm dying of cancer. No, I'm not dying of cancer. I believe God. No, you have to acknowledge where you are. All right? And from that point, you look to God. Yes, I am sick, but I'm not looking to that. I'm going to look to God and I'm going to put my faith in God, not in the sickness, to bring me out of this. And I'm going to keep looking to him. And I'm going to mix with people that are going to build my faith, not people that are going to lower my faith. I'm going to go to places where people are worshipping God so that I can break any power that's over me. I'm going to go and fellowship with the right people who are going to build me, not take me away from God. I'm going to listen to sermons that are faith building, that are going to build my faith. Okay? At the same time, I still have to go to the doctor and acknowledge that there's a problem. So faith isn't, and I know that from time to time we've heard preachers speak like that. They mean well. I'm not criticising anyone. I don't want to criticise any Christian person who's doing their best. But for me, that's how we've got to see it. Because we've got to be real people as well. We've got to be sound people. So we don't look. This guy was called a mighty warrior. And Gideon answered him, "Forgive me, my Lord. But if Yahweh is with us, then why is it that all this is happening around us?" Fair question. He's saying, well, yeah, but, look at it. Or I've got cancer or whatever it is. Look at the mess we're in. if you're with us. So anyway, we'll go on and see if we can get a few more answers. Do not, it was happening now. And where are all the wonders our ancestors tell us of when they say, did not Yahweh bring us out of Egypt? But now Yahweh has deserted us. He has abandoned us to Midian. Fair question. But again, it's important, and they were doing this, it's important to remember. Remember. Eucharist, communion table is supposed to be thanksgiving, but it's also remembering of the covenant of Jesus Christ. That's why Jesus asked us to do it often, to remember. Even doing a weekend like this, we remember the vows. We remember where we started. We remember God who was in that marriage. One of the basic teachings is, which Derek Prince says so well, the chord of three strings. God, a man and a woman. We remember. Remembering, again, if you want to grow in faith, if you want to move forward to the next step, remember, jot down things that God has done for you. Because a lot of times we sink lower and lower, we forget, I was healed of cancer, or my marriage was, pretty bad and look what God did, or the Lord provided for me marriage, or, I had no money and, God graciously helped us get a house, or whatever. Remember, write those things down, because the devil won't remind you of those. He'll remind you of all the bad ones. But usually there are a lot of those good ones around that we need to remember. And that's why remembering is important. So Gideon kind of is remembering, but he's kind of asking the question. He's also being really realistic and saying, well, how come, you did all that then and now we're in this mess? Okay? It's good to be honest with God. All right? It's good to be honest with God. You're not, I don't believe in ever getting angry with God. Again, that's my personal view. But I believe you can be honest with God. Honest with God. If you're angry, you tell him you're angry. That's different. You've got to be ruthlessly honest, because that's real prayer. Real prayer is being honest with God. And this Yahweh turned to him and said, go in, the strength now upholding you, and you will rescue Israel from the power of Midian. Do I not send you myself? Gideon answered him, forgive me, my Lord, but how can I deliver Israel? My clan, you must know, is the weakest in Manasseh. So he was from the tribe of Manasseh, which was in the north. I think Manasseh was one of Joseph's sons. He had two. And they're right up in the north there. And I am the least important in my family. Yahweh answered him, I will be with you, and you shall crush Midian as though it were a single man. Gideon said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, give me a sign that it is you who speak to me. See, God was speaking to him, but he still wanted a sign. And I told you his faith was not A-grade faith. Again, be encouraged. Don't let the devil rob you. Oh, the beauty about the Bible, the old covenant, is particularly, yes, there's a lot of, it's about people, warts and all. Warts and all, some pretty bad sins there as well for you to read about, as well as the good things. Don't undersell yourself. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. in the area of your gifting and your calling. So if I find favour in your sight, give me a sign that it is you who speak to me. I beg you, do not go away until I come back. I will bring you my offering and set it down before you. And he answered, I will stay until you return. Gideon went away and prepared a young goat and made unleavened cakes and ephah flour. He put the meat in the basket and the broth in the pot and brought it all to him underneath the terebinth. And he came near the angel of the Lord, said to him, take the meat and unleavened cakes, put them on this rock, and pour broth over them. Gideon did so. Then the angel of Yahweh reached out the tip of the staff in his hand and touched the meat and unleavened cakes. Fire sprang from the rock, consumed the meat and unleavened cakes, and the angel of the Lord vanished before his eyes. Then Gideon knew this was the angel of the Lord. And he said, alas, Lord, I have seen the angel face to face. And Yahweh answered him, peace be with you, have no fear, you will not die. Gideon built an altar there to Yahweh, and he called it Yahweh Peace. This altar stands at Ophrah of Abiezer. Now that night Yahweh said to Gideon, take your father's fattened calf and pull down the altar of Baal. Pull down the altar to Baal belonging to your father, and cut down the sacred post at the side of it. So he was asked to go to his father, and this wouldn't have been easy for him in those cultures. And his father, see, the problem here already was that they were worshipping the Baal. Okay, they weren't faithful to Yahweh. And it's the same with us. We have other gods. And sometimes we've got to demolish those gods. They're different for different people. What's a god to me may not be a god to you. But our gods aren't silver and, they're what we worship, what we idolise. And so he had to pull that down. Then on top of the bluff, build a carefully constructed altar to Yahweh, to your God. Take the fattened calf and burn it as a holocaust on the wood of the sacred post you have cut down. Then Gideon chose 10 of his servants and did as Yahweh had ordered him. But since he stood too much in fear of his family, you see, he was weak. It was natural for him to fear his family, particularly in the context of those families. Again, don't dismiss the natural. Don't let the fact that there's weakness stop you from moving. And the townspeople to this day, day by day, he did it by night. Next morning, when the townspeople got up, the altar to Baal had been destroyed. The sacred post that stood beside it now cut down. The fattened calf had been burned as a holocaust on the newly built altar. Then they said to each other, who has done this? They searched, made inquiries, and declared, Gideon, son of Joash, has done it. Then the townspeople said to Joash, bring out your son, for he must die, since he has destroyed the altar to Baal and cut down the sacred post that stood beside it. Joash answered all those mustered around him. It's interesting because family ties can be strong for good or for bad. And here we have the father, because of his love for his son, even though he's worshipping a false god, defend his son. And he said, this must have been inspiration from God. He said, would you plead for Baal? Would you champion his cause? Let anyone who pleads for Baal be put to death before dawn. If he is God, let him plead for himself. Now that Gideon has destroyed his altar. So basically what he was saying is, there's no need to kill my son and get rid of him, because if your God, Baal, is our God, in his case, he was part of the show, is God, then he can look after himself. He'll so let my son go. Don't destroy my son. Because if you're so worried about Baal, if Baal is really who you say he is, he'll deal with my son. And of course, that didn't happen because Baal is inferior to the God of Isaac and Jacob. And then I'll skip a bit. Then all Midian and Amalek and the sons of the east joined forces, crossed the Jordan, and encamped in the plain of Jezreel. And the Spirit of Yahweh came to Gideon. He sounded the horn at Abiezer, rallied behind him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and Manasseh too rallied behind him. He sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun and Naphtali. These are northern tribes, and they too marched out to meet him. Gideon said to God, if you really mean to deliver Israel by my hand, as you have declared, see now, I spread a fleece on the threshing floor. Now, you know the fleece? It's the famous fleece about the wheat and the dew. I won't read it because I'm running out of time. Again, his faith he's weak. He's asking God for a fleece. I used to do that a lot in the early days. Got about 5 fleeces. That's all right. On a journey. Of course, the fleece has to be true fleece. You don't say something like, I'll go down to Circular Quay. If there's a ship there, then it means that God wants me to go on a trip on a ship. That's not a fleece. It's got to be highly unlikely. But it's not recommended that you live your life by fleeces, although occasionally, if they're really, really a fleece, it's okay to confirm something. So, his faith was weak again. He wanted a fleece. And then we know God showed him, and so he went on. And then there's the story, which I haven't got time to read, about the army. You know, this world. This is when he started off with 10,000. And, there was a process of elimination. One of them was the soldiers had to drink water from like a river, and the ones that drank the water like dogs, because they were the ones that they kept on eliminating till he ended up with 300. Okay, and the 300, because they were totally committed, won against the Midianites. Now you know that's the story well. I haven't got time to read it all. I don't mind reading scripture, but it's a time factor, and it's important that we do the Word of God. So he ended up with 300, but those 300 was sufficient to do the job because they were committed. And again, God does a cleansing process in us. So when you're on a journey of faith, you won't get to the top of the mountain with one sort of test. There's a number of tests you'll get through. And as your faith gets stronger, you'll get stronger and stronger. And so right throughout the story, this is the message as we'll have some worship and maybe we can respond. Don't look at your weakness. This Bible is full of weak people. In fact, it's a condition. It's actually a positive thing, not a negative thing. If you don't think you need God, then you're in the wrong place. That's to begin with. But the problem in Western Christianity is we get to a place, we do all the right responses early, and then we get a place of comfort, which is a normal thing with human beings. But we've got to keep growing in faith. Whether it's the collection next week, whether it's in our marriages, whether it's in our personal life, whether it's a single person seeking God for marriage, we've got to step out in faith at times and take that step in God. We've got to reach out. We might want to get this job, but we're fearful at going for an interview or applying because we're comfortable where we are. There are lots of reasons. Our faith may be weak, like Gideon. He had to kept on asking God, is it this, is it that? Can I check again? Can I get a fleece? Can I get this many people? And then, he's dealing with God. But the key here is he's dealing with God. He's going back to God. He's connecting with God. He knows his weakness, but that weakness doesn't put him off. He goes to God. God keeps bringing him forward. So that's the challenge for us today. I believe this is from God because I didn't have much time to prepare. I was really looking to God. And when Julie, because she didn't know I was going to speak on this. When she spoke about that incident with Jesus and Peter, I knew that that's what I should speak about. Because we are at a place as a community where the Lord really wants us to exercise faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It was by faith our ancestors, it goes on Hebrews, please God. Again, I'm not suggesting that everything I say you have to totally agree with or is 100% right. But sometimes people have, because people have put guilt trips on people, you haven't got enough faith, that's why you're not healed and things like that. People have sort of retracted, but we don't retract because someone might misunderstand something or has something is not presenting it quite right. We don't stop marriage because there's some really bad marriages, And a lot of people think, well, I don't want to get in this faith thing because, it's only for sort of certain people, like, those people who are kind of that personality type, who, you're a salesman type personality. No, it's not. It's for all of us. It's for you and me. And we have a great example in Gideon, who did mighty things for God. He saved Israel. Had God not used him, we wouldn't have Israel. He was a very critical person, and so are you, in what God's called you.